The sun was already low when Daniel Hayes returned to the settlement with dust on his boots and a tired look in his eyes. He had spent the entire day tracking to missing horses that had wandered toward the dry hills. The desert wind had burned his cheeks, and his shoulders felt heavy from carrying his rifle and water pack. Even so, Daniel walked with calm steps, the same way he always did. The people in the settlement trusted him more than they trusted most men. He never asked for payment for his work, never expected praise, and never turned away anyone who needed help. The settlement stood at the edge of the Arizona territory, far from big towns, far from soldiers, and far from anyone who could protect them if trouble came. That was why Daniel stayed. He believed everyone deserved safety, even if they lived in the harshest land in the country. As he crossed the open yard between the cabins, a group of men walked toward him. Samuel, the oldest elder, along with 2 other settlers. They each wore serious expressions. "Daniel," Samuel said, lifting his hand. "We need to speak with you."
Daniel paused.
He sensed something unusual in their voices. "Is someone hurt?" he asked. "No," Samuel answered. "But something important happened today." They led him toward the small meeting area, a wooden platform where the settlers gathered when decisions had to be made. A few women waited nearby, whispering to each other. Some looked nervous, others curious. Daniel could not understand what was wrong. Then he saw her. The Apache woman he had helped months ago, Idana, stood on the far side of the platform. She was small, thin, and wrapped in a simple cloth shawl. Her long black hair fell to her shoulders. She kept her eyes lowered as if she felt uncertain or shy, but Daniel recognized her immediately. He had found her badly hurt near the stream during the summer storm season, lying beside a fallen tree. Her arm had been bleeding, and she could barely walk. He had carried her to the settlement, bandaged her arm, and brought her food and water for days until she recovered. Since then, she had stayed close to the settlement. Not fully part of it, but not entirely separate either. She rarely spoke, but she listened carefully. She watched the people with quiet eyes, trying to learn how this new place worked. Daniel stepped forward. "What happened?" he asked gently. "Why is everyone gathered?" Samuel rubbed his beard and let out a breath. "You saved us again this week," he said. "Those horse thieves would have cleaned out our whole herd if you hadn't tracked them down." Daniel shrugged. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Samuel said. "Not anyone. Only you." The other elders nodded. Daniel felt uncomfortable with praise, but he waited patiently for them to continue. "We held a meeting," Samuel went on. "We wanted to give you something to show our thanks." Daniel raised one eyebrow. "A gift? More like a reward?" another elder said, glancing toward Nita. Daniel stiffened. "A reward?" His voice stayed calm, but his jaw tightened slightly. Samuel looked uneasy, as if he wasn't sure whether their decision had been right. "Nita trusts you more than anyone here. She follows you with her eyes whenever you pass by. She listens to you, and she has no family here. We believe she should live with you." God, Daniel blinked. He felt like he had heard the words incorrectly. "Live with me." "Samuel, she's a person," not before he could finish. Nita suddenly stepped forward. Her movements were quick, almost desperate. She crossed the space between them in only a few steps. Daniel didn't expect it, so he didn't move. She stopped in front of him, her head lowered. Then, without saying anything, she reached out and grabbed his leg. Both her hands wrapped around his trouser leg tightly, so tight, her fingers trembled. Daniel froze. He didn't know what to do at first. He looked down at the top of her head, then looked up at the elders, confused. "Nita," he said softly. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. She didn't even lift her head. Her grip only tightened. Her shoulders shook slightly, not with fear exactly, but with something deeper, something that came from the heart. A few settlers gasped. One woman covered her mouth. Another whispered, "She chose him." Samuel stepped back, surprised. "Well," he murmured, "it seems she agrees." Daniel gently crouched down so he could be closer to her eye level. "Nita," he said again, speaking slowly so she would understand, "you are not a reward. No one can decide where you should stay, except you. She didn't let go. Instead, she pressed her forehead against his knee. Her breath was shaky, like someone who had been holding back tears or fear for a very long time. Daniel felt something twist inside his chest. He understood suddenly this wasn't about being given away. This was about not wanting to be alone again, Nita, he whispered. Are you scared? Finally, she gave the smallest nod. Daniel's voice softened even more. I'm not going anywhere, he said. You don't have to hold on so tight. But she still didn't loosen her hands. The elders watched, unsure what to say. They had never expected this kind of reaction. They thought Daniel would simply accept the decision or politely refuse. They didn't understand the fear that lived inside Nita, fear built from memories none of them knew. Daniel placed his hand gently on her shoulder. Look at me, he said kindly. After a moment, she lifted her head. Her dark eyes were filled with worry, but also with trust, the kind of trust that forms slowly, day by day. Between two people who understand each other, without saying many words, Daniel felt the weight of her emotions. He knew he couldn't walk away now. If he told her to let go, it might feel to her like being abandoned all over again. If he stepped back, she might think she had no place left in the world. He spoke firmly but warmly. I will stay with you, he said. If you want to stay near me, you can. Not because someone decided it, but because you choose it. Her grip loosened just a little, enough to show that his words had settled her heart, but not enough for her to release him completely. Samuel cleared his throat. So, you accept? Daniel stood slowly, helping Nita to her feet without breaking her hold on him. I accept her choice, he said, but not as a reward. She will stay because she wants to, and I will take care of her safety until she finds her place. The elders nodded. None of them argued. They could see now that this situation was more delicate than they had understood. As the crowd dispersed, Daniel walked carefully so Nita could keep holding on to him without stumbling. She stayed close, gripping his leg just enough to feel secure. He guided her to the small cabin area near his own home. When they reached the wooden steps, she finally let go, but only because he gently took her hand and placed it on the railing. She understood his gesture. Stay close, but stand on your own feet too. He turned to her. You don't have to be afraid here, he said. No one will hurt you, and you are free to make your own choices. Nita watched him quietly. Her expression softened. Then, very slowly, she reached out and touched his sleeve knot, grabbing it. Not clinging, just touching it lightly, as if saying thank you without speaking. Daniel gave her a small smile. You're safe, he said. She nodded. The night came with a gentle breeze. The stars above the desert sky shone brightly. Most of the settlement slept, but Daniel stayed awake outside for a while, thinking. He wondered what kind of life Nita had lived before he found her by the fallen tree. He wondered what she feared most and what she needed now. He didn't have the answers yet. But he felt certain of one thing. He could not let her face any more pain alone. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Nita had stepped outside her shelter and stood beside him. She didn't hold his leg this time. Instead, she stood close to him, looking up at the stars he was staring at. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to, for the first time since he found her. Nita looked peaceful. She stayed beside him until the stars faded into the pale morning light. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, a bond born not from reward or duty, but from trust, safety, and the simple desire to not be alone in a harsh world. Morning sunlight warmed the edge of the settlement as Daniel stepped outside his cabin with a metal cup of warm tea. The air felt cool, the kind of coolness that came for only a short time before the desert sun grew strong. He looked toward the small shelter he had helped build for Nita the night before. The roof was made from old boards and canvas, nothing fancy, but it was clean and safe. Nita was already awake. She sat on a flat stone near the shelter, brushing her long black hair with her fingers. When she saw Daniel, she gave a small nod, still shy but no longer fearful. Daniel walked toward her with slow, relaxed steps. Good morning, he said softly. She repeated the words, her voice quiet but steady. Good morning. It was one of the first full English greetings she had spoken. Daniel smiled. You're learning fast. Nita lowered her eyes, but he could see a tiny smile on her lips. She seemed pleased that he noticed. He placed his cup on a wooden crate and pointed toward the open area where the settlers kept their animals.
Oh.
I'm going to feed the horses. You can join me if you want, or rest here. Nita hesitated, then stood. Instead of grabbing his leg like before, she simply walked beside him. Her steps were light, almost silent. She watched everything carefully, the people, the ground, the sky, like someone who had spent years surviving by awareness. The horses neighed softly as Daniel filled their troughs. Nita reached out to stroke one of the horses, a brown mare with white spots. The horse sniffed her hand and accepted the touch. Nita's eyes softened, as if she felt calm around the animal. Daniel noticed. You like horses? He asked. She took a moment to understand, then nodded. Yes, horses like gentle people, Daniel said. You have a calm soul. Nita looked confused for a moment, then smiled again, a little wider this time. She pointed at Daniel. You. Calm. Daniel laughed softly. Maybe a little. They worked quietly for a while. Daniel cleaned the stable, and Nita helped by carrying buckets and brushing the horses' coats. She moved with natural skill, as if she had grown up around animals. The settlers nearby watched with surprised expressions. Many of them had never seen Nita do more than walk quietly through the settlement. Now she moved with purpose, confidence, and a small spark of joy. Around noon, Daniel took her to the edge of the settlement, where wild herbs grew between the rocks. These are useful, he explained, pointing to a group of green leaves. Good for cooking, and good for small pains. Nita knelt down and touched the plant gently. Medicine, she said, pronouncing the word carefully. Yes, Daniel replied. Medicine. She looked around, then pointed to another plant with thin branches. Bad, she said firmly. Not good. What? Daniel nodded, impressed. You know the land well? Nita placed her hand on her chest, then pointed toward the distant mountains. My home. There. Daniel followed her gaze. The mountains stood tall and blue in the distance, the place where many Apache families lived. She looked at the mountains with mixed feelings, longing, worry, and quiet sadness all at once. Daniel didn't push her with questions. He just stood beside her, silent, letting her look as long as she needed. After a few moments, Nita turned back to him and pointed at the herbs again. She used her hands to show how they should be dried. Daniel watched carefully. She was teaching him now. He could see that sharing knowledge made her feel less like a stranger and more like part of something bigger. When they returned to the settlement, the children were playing near the well. They paused when they saw Nita. Some of them were curious, but others were unsure. Children learned from adults, and many adults had kept their distance from her for a long time. Daniel sat on a wooden bench and motioned for Nita to sit next to him. A small girl approached them with a curious look. She held a piece of cloth in her hand. Can she sew? The girl asked Daniel. Daniel smiled and looked at Nita. She wants to know if you can make clothes. Nita understood some of the words. She took the cloth gently from the girl and began folding it into shapes, first a small pouch, then a bracelet, then a pattern that looked like a tiny bird. The children's eyes widened. They gathered closer. One boy whispered, "She's good?" Nita handed the cloth back to the girl, who smiled brightly. "Thank you," the girl said. Nita's face softened with warmth. Her shoulders, usually tense with worry, relaxed. For the first time since arriving, she wasn't standing apart. She was part of the moment. As the day passed, the settlers began to notice how naturally Nita fit into the rhythm of their work. She helped the women gather laundry, carried water without being asked, and even comforted a crying toddler by giving him a carved wooden bead she kept tied around her wrist. Daniel watched her from a distance. Something in his heart felt lighter. Seeing her smile, even a little, made him feel like bringing her to the settlement had been the right thing, maybe the best thing he had done in a long time. Later in the afternoon, Daniel prepared a simple meal of beans, bread, and roasted vegetables. Nita sat across from him, copying his movements as they ate. She seemed curious about his habits, his tools, and even the way he held his spoon. She tasted everything slowly, as if learning the flavors one by one. When they finished eating, Nita tapped the table lightly. "Good," she said. Daniel nodded. "I'm glad." She then pointed at the meal and said, Teach cooking," Daniel asked. She nodded. So Daniel showed her how he washed vegetables, how to stir the pot, and how to check if the food was done. She listened with full attention, repeating his instructions in simple English. When she stirred the pot, she did it carefully, almost gracefully. "You're a fast learner," Daniel said. Nita touched her chest and smiled carefully. "I watch." Daniel chuckled. "Yes, you really do." As evening approached, the sky turned orange and purple. The desert wind became cooler, and people returned to their cabins. Daniel and Nita sat outside watching the sunset. They didn't talk much, but the silence was peaceful, not uncomfortable. At some point, a soft howl echoed in the distance, a coyote. Nita stiffened slightly and moved a little closer to Daniel. Her hand touched his sleeve, a small instinctive gesture of seeking safety. Daniel didn't pull away. "You're safe," he said quietly. "Nothing will harm you here." She nodded slowly, but kept her hand on his sleeve. It wasn't fear now, it was trust. A few moments later, she spoke in a soft voice. "Daniel." He turned to her. It was the first time she had said his name clearly. "Yes." She placed her hand lightly over her heart. "Thank you." Daniel felt something shift inside him. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was soft, like the feeling of a warm breeze after a long winter. He realized how deeply Nita valued safety, kindness, and the chance to belong. And he realized that her gratitude was not a small thing. It was a piece of her heart. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I'm glad you're here." Nita tilted her head slightly, then pointed to his chest and repeated his words. "Glad here?" Daniel laughed quietly. "Close enough?" As night settled, Daniel prepared her shelter with clean blankets, but when he turned to leave, Nita hesitated. She touched his sleeve again, this time gently tugging it, as if asking a question without words. "You want me to stay outside until you fall asleep?" he asked. Nita nodded, so Daniel sat on the step beside her shelter. He hummed a quiet tune, something his mother used to sing when he was a child. Nita lay down inside the small shelter, watching him through the open doorway. Her eyes were calmer now, not restless like before. It took only a few minutes for her breathing to slow into a peaceful rhythm. Daniel waited longer just to make sure she was comfortable. When he was certain she was asleep, he stood quietly. Before he walked away, he looked at her one last time. She lay curled under the blanket, her face soft and relaxed. He felt something protective rise inside him, something strong but gentle. He whispered into the night, "You're safe here. I promise." Then he returned to his cabin, unaware that Nita, half asleep, heard the last part of his whisper, and smiled faintly. The second day of their life together had begun with uncertainty, but ended with understanding. And though neither of them knew what the future held, something important had begun, something built slowly, with patience, kindness, and the simple power of being there for someone who had no one else. The next few weeks moved quietly but steadily. The settlement changed in small ways, almost without the people noticing. Where there had once been worry, now there was routine. Where there had once been distance between Nita and the settlers, now there was slow but steady trust. And where once Nita had stood alone at the edges of the camp, she now walked beside Daniel. Helping with the daily tasks he had carried by himself for so long, Daniel watched her confidence grow day by day. She helped him repair fences, collect firewood, and care for the horses. She also began to help the women with simple sewing work and often played with the smaller children. Every time a child laughed near her, Nita smiled, a real smile, warm and natural. But Daniel noticed something else too. Every evening when the sun touched the desert horizon, Nita stood for a long time facing the distant mountains. She watched them with the same quiet longing, the same mix of hope and sadness. He knew that her memories lived somewhere inside those mountains. He also knew that she had lost more than she had ever said. Daniel never pushed her to speak. He believed that some things needed time to surface. One cool morning, before the sun had fully risen, the sound of approaching riders echoed through the settlement. The hooves were slow and steady, not rushing or aggressive, just purposeful. Daniel stepped outside, and Nita followed him, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. A group of 5 Apache men approached, carrying a long white cloth tied to a wooden stick. The cloth fluttered gently in the wind, a sign of peace. The riders stopped a short distance from the settlement. Their leader, an older man with calm eyes and long silver-streaked hair, stepped forward. He carried himself with dignity, and his expression held no anger, only quiet seriousness. The settlers gathered around but kept a respectful distance. Daniel felt Nita take a small step behind him. Her hand lightly touched the back of his arm, not out of fear, but for comfort. The older man looked at her and froze for a moment. His breath caught. Something deep, something emotional flashed across his face. "Nita," he said softly. Nita's fingers tightened on Daniel's sleeve. Daniel turned to her, speaking gently. "Do you know him?" Nita swallowed hard, then nodded slowly. The older man stepped closer, lifting both hands in a peaceful gesture. His voice shook slightly. "We thought you were lost," he said. "We searched the mountains, the valleys, everywhere." Nita stared at him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She took one trembling step forward, then another. The man opened his arms, and Nita walked into them. It wasn't a dramatic embrace, but a gentle, once soft, emotional, full of quiet understanding. Daniel stepped back respectfully. This moment was not his to stand in the middle of. The older man held Nita's shoulders and looked at her carefully. "You are safe," he said. "You are home." Nita shook her head slowly. "Home," she whispered, then looked over her shoulder toward Daniel. The older man followed her gaze. His eyes softened even more. "You have someone who protected you," he said to her softly. "Someone who cared." Daniel bowed his head politely. "She was hurt when I found her," he explained. "She didn't speak, and she was afraid, so I stayed near her. That is all." The Apache leader nodded respectfully. "Thank you," he said with deep sincerity. "She is my brother's daughter. She is the last family I have left." Losing her almost broke him. Daniel nodded but stayed quiet. He didn't want to make this moment about himself. One of the young Apache riders stepped forward with a folded blanket decorated in traditional patterns. He offered it to Nita, and she touched it with gentle fingers. Her eyes softened, but she didn't take it. The older man noticed her hesitation. "Nita," he said kindly, "you can come back with us. Your home is waiting. Your people miss you." For the first time, Nita stepped away from him. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She simply moved aside so that both the riders and Daniel were in her view. Her hands began to shake. She looked at the mountains in the distance, then at the settlement, then at Daniel. Her eyes filled with questions she had no words for. Daniel stepped toward her slowly. "Nita," he said gently, "you can go with them if you want. You don't owe me anything." She shook her head quickly, almost sharply, as if the idea scared her. "You are free," he continued. "Free to choose. Free to return home. Free to stay. Whatever you decide, it will be your choice." Nita looked between the two worlds again. One was family, history, memories, home. The other was safety, trust, and the place where she had healed. Her uncle waited patiently. He did not pressure her. He simply said, "Your heart knows where it belongs." Nita's breath trembled. Her eyes softened. She turned slowly toward Daniel. Then she did something she had done only once before on the day her life changed. She stepped forward. She reached Daniel, and she wrapped both hands around his leg. The settlers gasped softly. The Apache riders exchanged glances. But her uncle only nodded with deep understanding. This time, her gesture was not born from fear. It came from certainty, from the quiet strength she had gained in the settlement. Her eyes were not wide with worry anymore. They were calm, steady, clear. She looked up at Daniel and whispered, "Stay." Daniel's throat tightened. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I'm here, he said softly. Nita held his leg for a moment longer, then released it. She stood tall, facing her uncle. Choose, she said in careful English. Then she pointed toward Daniel. Here, her uncle bowed his head in acceptance. Then we honor your choice. He stepped toward Daniel and extended his hand. You protected her when we could not find her. For that, we are grateful. Daniel shook his hand with respect. She is strong, he said. She learned fast. She helped us through the winter. She is part of our life now. Nita's uncle smiled gently. We will visit. And we welcome you to visit us as well. There is no wall between our paths. The two groups exchanged peaceful words for a while, before the Apache riders mounted their horses again. Nita watched them ride away, her eyes soft but steady. She did not cry. She did not regret. She simply let out a small breath. Like someone who had finally made the decision their heart had whispered for a long time, when they disappeared over the hill. Nita turned to Daniel. She stepped closer, not grabbing his leg this time, but gently touching his arm, her new way of saying she felt safe. Daniel smiled. Are you all right? She nodded. Yes. Do you feel at peace? He asked. Nita thought for a moment, then placed her hand over her heart and said, Peace. Here Daniel felt warmth spread through him. Good, he whispered. I'm glad. As the sun climbed higher, they walked back toward the settlement. The children ran toward Nita first, eager to show her a new game they had invented. The women waved to her, inviting her to help prepare lunch. The men nodded respectfully as she passed. Nita smiled at all of them. The settlement did not feel like a temporary place anymore. It felt like a home built from kindness, patience, and quiet understanding. Later that evening, Daniel sat outside his cabin, repairing a broken tool. Nita brought him a bowl of warm stew she had helped cook. She placed it beside him and sat close. He looked at her with a soft smile. Thank you. She nodded and looked up at the stars, the same stars she had watched with fear weeks ago. But this time her face was calm. Daniel put the tool aside and leaned back. You know, he said quietly, I thought you would return with your people. Nita's voice was gentle but firm. I choose here, she repeated. Daniel nodded. And I'll do my best to make this place good for you. Nita touched his sleeve, her silent way of saying thank you. The night settled over the settlement like a warm blanket. The wind was soft, the air peaceful, and the stars bright. Nita leaned back slightly, her shoulder brushing Daniel's. She didn't move away, and neither did he. Their bond had begun with fear, strengthened with trust, and now stood on the foundation of choice. A simple, quiet choice made from the heart. And as the night deepened, both of them felt something they had not felt in a long time. They felt that they were no longer alone.